So we are now recording and we'll get going, and I'll start with the intro and go through a couple of things. I'll introduce you, and then I've done wrote up a bunch of stuff in terms of clauses, and we can go through those. All right?
Okay.
All right. All right. Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a 5 o'clock session. I love these 5 o'clockers. Hey Kayla, it's just easier. I like the 5 o'clock. You do this for half an hour or whatever, then you go off and have a pint, have something to eat, and do what you have to do at night. So tonight we're talking about protecting tenants and strengthening Community Housing Act, Bill-184. I'm with Kayla Andrade, of course, with Ontario Landlords Watch. She's going to hop in here with me in just a moment. And let's move on here. By the way, you see that NFG on the top of that slide? That stands for no fluff guarantee. So that means that there's no selling. We're not going to try to upsell you or sell products or anything like that. That's not going to happen. So whenever you see that logo from now on, that's what that means. So you're in a friendly space. All right, let's keep going. Boom. All right, so I'm going to start off with a disclaimer. All right, I'm a 52-year-old guy. I like football. I like hockey. I like my cereal, pie, and quick. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a paralegal. Okay, sometimes I can talk like one, but I'm really not. I'm not versed in that. So Kayla and I are here. We're just giving our opinions, our 2 cents, and our thoughts on Bill 184. So if you're impacted in any way by Bill 184, if you have any questions, all that stuff, go see a professional, not a shrink. I'm talking about a lawyer or paralegal, and you'll be in great hands. All right, so that's the disclaimer I wanted to toss out first. And before going on, I just want to mention that I went over the Residential Tenancies Act, and then I looked at Bill 184, including the amendments that were included. And I did my best at taking as much as I could and stuffing it into this presentation. I probably missed 3 or 4. There's probably a few things that I don't have, but I think they're kind of minor. And we'll get into that in just a second. But I just wanted to let you know, all right? So there's probably a couple of things that are minor that aren't included. And I have my last slide, I list 3 or 4 things that people can go check out if you're interested. So Kayla, yes. Welcome. Awesome. Thanks for coming in. And of course, take 30 seconds, tell us about yourself, what you're doing with Ontario Landlords Watch, and then maybe perhaps give us a minute breakdown of what you've been doing with Bill 184.
Yeah, so hopefully you guys don't hear all my kids in there. 2 adults there. I don't know if they're going to be able to handle all the kids.
How many kids you got, Kayla?
Pardon?
How many kids?
4.
4.
4.
Right.
Yeah, the baby is now going to be 9 months at the end of the month, so he's getting easier, but he's also getting a lot more mobile. So he's keeping me busy. But if anyone's on the phone with me, they're hearing a baby and they're hearing me talk about policies that we're trying to get changed at the same time. So a working mom just trying to get a little head for the landlords. So, but I'll give you a little lowdown what we've been up to. So right now we've been following many different type of groups that have been created through, before I even started, like when I was from 10 years ago. So I've been helping them get themselves out there because they just recently held a protest at Queen's Park. We would like to have, I think we're going to plan another one where we're going to put more time and effort into getting that protest started, just to give it more of a concept that you're getting public awareness into what the landlords are asking for, getting the media attention. But in reality, we need to be working on Bill 184 and how it's going through the 3rd read right now. A lot of us can't do anything about it right now, but we did have our help into creating Bill 184 and getting our report into the Standing Policy Committee, the Policy Standing Committee, as well as watching for 2 days of the debates that were happening, listening to guest speakers from landlords, realtors, and lots of tenant organizations, and being able to still submit more information to the Standing Policy Committee, and also protest the fact that they did not give us an opportunity to speak to the Standing Committee as well.
And then if I can jump in there just for 1 second, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big point, because Kayla's been involved in landlording advocacy issues for several years, and we didn't have an opportunity, you know, to get in there and voice our opinions. There were plenty of tenants who were in there, tenant organizations, but FRPO, I believe, was in there. There was another landlord agency, I think, was in there for the bigger guys, but for the smaller landlords, we didn't really have much representation. We did have a few landlords, but not as many. Okay, and so that was too bad. But the good news is that it probably wasn't going to change much of anything. Hey.
No, like when we found out from the second read being carried, and knowing that the Bill-184 was now being pushed to the Policy Standing Committee, now it was about understanding who the Standing Committee was, who are the MPPs sitting on that committee, and then it allowed us to try to connect with those MPPs one-on-one, as well as register to present to the Standing Committee and submit documents as well. Yeah. And for whatever reason, they decided that, and we were like the first one, like soon as it happened, and we informed our members when they gave us, you know, hey guys, you know, 24-hour notice you have left before, if you want to speak to the Standing Committee. We have 3 of our members that got to speak with the Standing Committee. So I spent some time, you know, giving them the information, training them on how to say what to say. But I am so proud of Teresa and how Teresa said it. We had a
You just popped on too, eh?
Yeah, she was phenomenal. Like I was painting my unit and listening to her, like, you go girl. Like it was, and that's what it's all about, is now training not only just the members in the group to do what I did and do what other people are doing. It's about giving them the tools that they need to keep fighting, so that we can have more people like me to do it.
Teresa
but it's really sad that they didn't.
Teresa did a fantastic job. Teresa, congratulations on that. And so how about we get started with, I'm just going to go through and describe a little bit of what Bill-184 is already. And Kayla's going to, we'll just have a discussion as we go through some of the clauses. So Bill-184, it's basically it includes 4 different schedules that impact the Building Code Act, the Housing Services Act, Ontario Mortgage and Housing Corporation Repeal Act, and the one that is important to us, the Residential Tenancies Act. So we're more interested in Schedule 4, the Residential Tenancies Act. So that's the piece that had all the changes to the RTA, all the amendments. The current status of Bill-184, like Kayla just described, it's gone through 2 House readings. It went through committee. In the committee, it had a couple of amendments made by the Conservatives that were approved. And right now it's sitting what they call ordered for 3rd reading, order of the House. So it's going to go through a 3rd reading with the House. It's going to pass because the Conservatives have the majority, and then they'll do a vote and it will receive royal assent and into law. And so that's what Bill-184 is. And within Bill-184, there's a lot of clauses in there. And, you know, initially, Kayla, I was thinking, when I first saw it, I was like, oh man, this sucks. Like, you know, I know that you're advocating, we really wanted to see some changes, especially when it came to non-payment of rent process and for L1, you know, more meaty stuff. And unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Well, I don't know. I would say that what has happened is that there's a section of the mediation, right? And there's going to be some balancing back and forth, because you hear something in one of the debates, and when it was getting voted on, you heard something different from Parm Gill, the assistant to the Minister of Housing. And when you talk about the mediation prior to a hearing, we're going to be able to, how fast can that happen? And if these agreements are being made without having a hearing, and if a tenant fails to meet their end of the agreement, does that give the landlord the right to issue the eviction process without going to a hearing, Or will the tenant still have an option to say, sorry, I broke my agreement, I want to have this now heard at the hearing? And that's where I'm a little confused about as well. But what we have to see is that even though that is not the greatest type of change that we really wanted to see, we have over here the Attorney General who is changing the way that the Landlord and Tenant Board is going to be operating. And he stated it's going to be very similar to what the BC government does. And it's more of a streamlined approach where it could be this form atmosphere, it could be through the phone, it could be through the computer. So between these minor changes of the RTA and having what the Attorney General is, now we have to now pay attention to what Doug Downey's doing, because that could really make that process of a faster eviction be more appealing, into encouraging more landlords to stay into the industry or want to get into the industry.
And we'll get into the mediation piece. That's one of the pieces I've had at the end on my last slide.
I'm jumping all over the place.
That's when I know you're in your zone, Kayla. That's when I know you're up and going. So of course, your insights are always appreciated. The headlines, what's interesting, it's funny to look at the headlines when this bill came out, and we look online, and the one headline from Global News, I believe this was last night: protesters rally at Queen's Park in front of Toronto Mayor's condo over eviction bill. Like, the two things are wrong with that. One, they're calling it the eviction bill, which it isn't. It's not an eviction bill. It doesn't come close to that. And why are they going to John Tory's place anyways? He has nothing to do with the provincial government. It's the provincial government that has control over the RTA. So I'm not sure about that. The next one, advocates say new bill gives unfair advantage to landlords. Bill-184 fails to address gaps that exist in tenants' rights. That's from the Standard in St. Catherine, I believe. And, the media has just been, feeding this stuff, It's continuous. And I challenge everybody, if you're watching, go ahead and Google Bill-184 and see how many pages come up that's all about tenant rights, and see if there's anything about landlord advocacy in there. And it's very, there's not a lot in there for us, unfortunately.
Well, and this is the part that it gives the headline. It just gives the headline. It's very juicy. You're going to click on it. There's more tenants, there are landlords. And when you get to see that they showed up at John Tory's house, it made the news where the police got involved. And now it's brought the attention to Doug Ford to come out today to say that he will always protect the tenants and he will always protect their rights. And they talked about Bill-184 in itself, but what they are not doing, it's kind of like a smoke and mirror effect. The tenants have their rights with the RTA, they have their rights with the Landlord and Tenant Board, they have their rights with property standards. And if you look at what the overall objective is for the tenants, is to make sure that they say that they don't get evicted so the landlords can jack the rent up, and they want to make sure that their maintenance is being dealt with, and they're getting that.
Yeah, it's so the media hasn't been very savvy or friendly. I would say that the tenant groups pretty much on par, pretty much what we expected. A lot of outcry, a lot of tenants aren't happy, and tenant advocates aren't happy with the bill. They're really calling it the eviction bill. And I've gone through the amendment, or the Bill-184, and I can tell, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a paralegal, but I don't see anything in there that really helps evict tenants, like snap of the fingers, like they're crying, like they're saying. So overall, what's interesting too, Kayla, I found that, if I read it, and I didn't, at first I thought the bill, oh my gosh, this is going to be really bad for landlords. And then I see Acorn and other tenant groups getting a little bit pissed off. And then I found out, okay, well, there's the landlord groups and also the tenant groups that are fighting against Bill-184. So to me, that's an indication that perhaps the government actually wrote up a balanced bill.
I think the reason why they're calling it an eviction bill is because they believe that the tenants don't have the education regarding what the policies and the procedures are. So if they do agree, as long as the landlord agree and the tenant agree to a mediation before the hearing, and that agreement comes into an order, and they can't make that agreement, then they don't know the process of how they can still try to get a stay on that order. So I think that's the only one that I can see them trying to do. I know that the other one was the rent increase. So if you're giving an unlawful rent increase or above the guideline rent increase, and if the tenants don't complain about that within that year,
We're coming to that.
they're going to be able to, that's going to become the lawful rent. So now they think that they're going to be able to do that part of it. So a lot of it's going to be through bad knowledge of what the current system is and how they're interpreting Bill 184. And in reality, this is about the affordability. This is about the COVID. It's just them right now trying to stop the rent having to be paid right now. And they know, you know, when the suspension of the eviction stop, they're now getting concerned and feeling that they are going to be evicted, which is going to just play in the hands of the landlords who wanted them out because they already pay low rent anyways of some sort.
All right, let's get into the actual changes. Okay, so Bill 184 creates amendments to the RTA. So let's go through. Can everyone see that? Can you see that, Kayla? Your glasses are fine?
Yeah.
I'm having this. So the first one talks about the provision of information to tenants. So currently, if you're renting out a unit, I'm looking at Andre and Sylvie, I can see them on the screen. So if you guys are renting out a unit, you, as of today still, you have to give the tenants information about their rights, about the landlord-tenant board and their role and their number and email address and all that stuff. That's law. You have to give that to the tenants. Under Bill 184, what happens, Kayla?
So it no longer applies on or the day after the bill 184 receives the royal assessment. So this is the part where they were trying to get a lot more given to the tenants, and Perm Guild came out and said, like, you know, everything is already there. When you get an order, when you get the information, it's already there for the tenants in itself.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the tenants actually going out there and educating themselves and learning. You know, it's enough hand-holding. We do enough hand-holding as it is. This also applies, by the way, to suite meter information. So if you have a prospective tenant coming up, and currently the RTA says, well, you have to give them information about the usage and the costs for electricity in the unit if they ask for it, if you have a suite meter. And but under Bill 184, that is also scratched out. You won't have to do that anymore. So that's kind of a win for landlords, right? It's just a little bit less work. I just hope that tenants actually, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to see tenants just become more educated on their own, right? Learn about their rights and the RTA and all that stuff. All right. Number 2. Do you want to cover this one, Kayla?
Sorry, phone, your thing cut out probably because I'm going to text my family and let them know to take the baby for a walk.
I'll keep talking then. I'll take this one. And so this one talks about compensation to tenants. So currently, if I want to sell a property, or I'll just take Denise and Stuart. Let's say they want to sell their property. There's a tenant in there. The buyer comes up and says, hey, I want vacant possession. As of today, zero compensation has to be paid to the tenant. And what Bill 184 does is, well, guess what? In that same situation, the tenant will now be eligible or should be getting 1 month's compensation in rent, 1 month's rent compensation from the seller, not from the buyer, it's from the seller. And it has to be paid prior to the termination date that's set out in the notice. So this is new. It's not in the RTA today. So that's why I have, see that referee there at the bottom, right? He's throwing a flag, Kayla. That means it's a penalty. We don't like penalties, right? So that's what that referee is doing.
But so, you know what would be nice, Tony, if that they were able to add in that if the tenant decided to fight this section, that they shouldn't be compensated the funds that it is, because they're hindering the fact that it could prevent the sale from going through, but they're still guaranteed the funds.
Yeah, and it's, uh, I don't like the idea of punishing an investor because they want to cash out or they want to sell or whatever. You know, it's just another. Some people think that, well, the tenant needs to be compensated because it's a disruption to their lives. Okay, that's true, but you know, on the other hand, the landlord has made heavy investments and a lot of investment here and provided housing, and he wants to exit the property, and I don't think they should be punished for it, in my opinion. But anyways,
It's
that's what
just
you guys.
notice, giving long notice, enough notice for them to make the adjustments for their life.
Yeah, instead of 60 days, maybe make it 90 days.
See, and then this way that like they just think that the landlords are rich and all tenants are poor.
Yeah. All right. Um, okay, so the next two or three have to talk about compensation as well, but under different situations. I'll try to explain it as well as I can. It gets a little bit dry, okay, guys? I know it's a little bit dry. It's hard to make this exciting. It is. So this has to do under RTA Section 52. So under Section 52, compensation of 3 months rent or a unit acceptable to tenant or to tenant for tenants if the building has at least 5 units or more. So that's in terms of you want to evict the tenant, you can go ahead, that's what it says there, but you have to provide them 3 months rent. And this applies to a building with at least 5 units or more. So under Bill-184, what they've added, this is new, they haven't striked anything out, they're adding it. They're saying a landlord shall compensate a tenant in the amount of 1 month's rent or offer the tenant another rental unit acceptable to the tenant. And this applies to a building that has fewer than 5 residential units. So under the, you know, if you look on the top there, under Section 52, it's 3 months rent and you have at least 5 units. The new clause coming in, it's 1 month's rent, fewer than 5 units. So that's why I put the flag, the referee again, right? So we're getting dinged. And all of this is to try to stem what, Kayla? What are they trying to do here?
They're really going to try to they're really going to try to penalize the landlords who are trying to evict their tenants to move them out into getting higher rent for their rental unit, and thinking that this would discourage them from doing it, and also including the landlords who have the smaller units underneath this portfolio, because obviously sometimes that, if they are doing illegal eviction, doesn't mean it's happening on the bigger scale. It could be smaller scales too. So this is a way for them trying to show protection again towards the tenant, by having this type of policy in place.
Yep. All right. Next one. Okay. So now we're going to RTA Section 54, and we're talking again about tenants' right to compensation, repair, or renovation. So in Section 54 of the Residential Tenancies Act, it says compensation of 3 months rent or a unit acceptable to tenants for tenants if the building has at least 5 units or more. So same type of situation. It's just the previous one had to do with demolition and conversion. So you're actually demolishing the home or demolishing the building or converting it perhaps from residential to commercial or residential to condominium. That's my understanding of it. This one has to do with just repair and renovation, which is really, I'm thinking of maybe doing an SDU, that type of thing, okay? Doing a secondary dwelling unit. So what happens here with Bill-184, go ahead, you can evict the tenant if you want. You have to follow the rules, and you have to provide 1 month's rent as well as compensation to the tenant, as long, and this applies to buildings that have fewer than 5 residential units. So along the same lines as trying to prevent rent evictions.
And again, if you are looking at what the real issues are in this housing industry, this is why the landlords are fighting the Bill of 184, because it's just not grasping the solution for to correct the housing crisis in itself, which we're still all paying for that as a whole as taxpayers. And again, it's more punishments, more rules, more restrictions, and things got to be more of a black and white. But again, it's just when it comes down to repair and renovations, they want us to put money into the place. They want us to keep renovating, keeping it safe for the tenants. But at the same time, we can't be working around our tenants in another way of, here's some money and this is go away, but you're still having to offer the unit back to the tenant still at the same rate.
Yeah. So I'm just letting some people in here. Here we go. Okay. So sorry guys, again, this is like really dry stuff. Thank God Kayla's here to brighten everything up for me.
I know, it's like
it is.
It's almost the third day of the standing policy committee. That was the very dryness of it, and the first 2 days was hearing everybody.
Yeah. This one goes to the
this is good.
Yeah, this is the one. You want to speak to that one?
Say that again.
You want to speak to this one?
Yeah, so underneath the current subsection 82, at the hearing, the application under section 69 that is based on the notice of termination underneath section 59, non-payment of rent, the tenant may arise any issue that could be subject to an application made by the tenant. So now this is the one that we were excited about because it's now under the section 82 as reenacted that the tenant may do so if the tenant complies with the specific requirements, including giving the advance written notice of intent to raise an issue, or provides an explanation satisfactory to the board, explaining why the requirements could not be met. So a lot of this could be exciting because normally that's how our tenants are avoiding the eviction, prolonging the eviction process, is because when you finally take them to the board to rate for non-payment of rent, they bring up any type of small maintenance issue, even though it shouldn't really be a maintenance issue. They still put everything on hold, they get an adjournment, and now you have to wait again. This could be what we were looking for on trying to stop tenants from raising maintenance concerns to avoid the eviction process. But what worries me with this is that what is going to be in giving advance written notice prior to a hearing? Is that 24 hours? Does it have to be submitted? Can they write it on a napkin before their number gets called to the adjudicator? Like, well, I just want to make sure we know what that entails. But I would say your application will have to be in before your date of hearing. I don't see them listening to anything at the landlord and tenant board. So that this could be a really good thing, especially if we have our tenants not educated on Bill 184. They might say, don't worry, I'll bring up a maintenance issue and we'll get it adjourned.
So yeah, I thought this was a good thing as well. Just that, the tenants can't show up at the hearing and bring up a bunch of stuff just to bring up a bunch of items and complaints and then prolong the hearing or get a, what do you call that, a stay or whatever schedule. So that's why I'm giving this one here, I'm giving it the old touchdown. Instead of throwing the flag, I'm giving it a touchdown. So I thought this was good, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next one. Boom. All right. Power of board eviction. Now, this is the clause, everybody, that is really riling up the tenants and the tenant groups. So Kayla, you can probably explain it a little bit better.
Yeah, so as of right now, even for the way that the mediation happens, a lot of landlords and tenants are waiting a long period of time to get to a hearing date in which when you get in there, they will ask you that, if tenants need legal aid, and then if anyone wants to mediate. But if you don't agree in mediation, you can still be heard by an adjudicator. It still just gives them the option, but both parties have to agree. That happens a lot currently at the landlord and tenant board, where they will mediate, they will make an agreement, they will go in front of an adjudicator to agree that they are agreeing on that. But then again, when tenants don't apply to, if tenants don't fulfill their agreement, then they can either apply to go back to the hearing, and landlords still have to apply for the hearing. So underneath Bill 184, refusal for certain arrears of the rent without restricting the generalization of subsection 1 and 2 in the hearing. So ideally, this is the confusion part that I have. So held in the respect of the application under section 69 of an order evicting a tenant based on the arrears of rent arrears in the whole or in a part during the period beginning of March 17, 2020 and ending on the prescribed date pertaining to whether exercise is power under, this is why we have landlord tenant board issues. Powers under subsection, the board shall consider whether the landlord has attempted to negotiate an agreement with the tenant, including the terms of the payment of tenant arrears.
Yes.
We're going to see ourselves with mediation and what we want to see happening with mediation and having an agreement put in place. And if you break that agreement, we're going to be able to have that agreement sent in and file for the eviction. But now with COVID, this is why it was really important in the beginning for every landlord out there to have some type of template showing proof that you sent this type of template to your tenants to say, we understand COVID is very difficult right now for everybody. We want to work with you. Let's work out a payment arrangement, and then show how the tenant did not try to work with you or try not to work a payment plan in place, and having a very descriptive knowing of who your tenant are, where they were working, were they affected, were they collecting the benefit, so that way you can have a very strong case in front of the adjudicator as you go in to say that they have been receiving money, you have tried to work with them, they just took advantage of COVID, and hopefully you can get the eviction that we wanted to see.
Yeah. So, you know, when COVID came out, the government was saying, okay, listen, you guys, you landlords out there, you need to go out and work with your tenants, right? You need to find ways to work with them, prepayment plans, help them out, you know, cut the rent, whatever it is. You know, we heard that from Ford many, many times. We heard that from Jim Watson here as well in Ottawa. And so they were saying that for a few months. And basically what they're doing in this section is that when the board is looking at, they're at a hearing and they're looking at, you know, what was fulfilled in terms of the tenants and the landlords. What did they do? Like, they're looking at issues, right? Like, did they try to fix things or not? And so they added this clause. And we've been saying for months now, landlords, you better be working with your tenants, because if you haven't been working with your tenants for non-payment of rent, and you go to the board, you end up at the LTV is going to look at you and say, well, wait a second, where's the evidence that you actually tried to work something out with the tenants? And if you did, and you have written confirmation, written evidence, great. You can hand that in, and that's going to help your cause. If you don't have it, then it's going to hurt your cause big time, I think, in my opinion. We'll see what happens down the road. But
I say they'll put them on a very more of a lengthier payment plan versus a shorter one if you weren't giving the information.
The maximum is 1 year now, right? According to the RTA, it's 1 year max.
To go back to the board?
No, for repayment plans can be maximum.
Oh, yeah.
Duration. So, yeah. By the way, that text here on the left that I had to, the amendment means that an eviction hearing the board must consider. That was tweeted to me by the minister's staffer. He jumped in a conversation in a thread, and he typed that. So that was, I just copied and pasted it. So it's good information. And it does, that's what it's trying to do, encourage repayments over evictions, I guess. So I didn't put, I was kind of neutral with this one. I just want to wait it out and see what happens. Next one. All right. What do you say, Kayla? Good?
Yeah. You really want my opinion on this one?
I already
You can get the, so I'll read it off first. The landlord may apply to the board. I don't know why it shows Netflix as I'm trying to read this. So if I say Netflix, then
Okay.
the landlord may apply to the board for an order requiring a tenant, boardwalk tenant, to pay the utility costs described in the tenancy agreement while the tenant was possession of the rental units and no later than 1 year after the tenant or former tenant ceased in possession of the rental unit. So number one, there's many municipalities that allow the utility bill to be transferred over to the landlord's property taxes if a tenant fails to make payment on that, if they're in their unit or they're not in the unit, in possession of the unit. So this could be a good thing if you look at the concept of having the board issue it on the order and not have to go through small claims court. But if we're only getting an order and still having to go small claims court, all we're doing is feeding the giant again. We're just feeding another form, another date that's going to be taken to be put into queue for the landlord and tenants to have this dealt with. And in reality, it's like, are they going to be able to collect this bill? And right now, landlords were applying to the landlord and tenant board to evict tenants for the ones who didn't pay their utility bill. And that's, you know, we're okay if we can evict you and not pressure you into paying. That was probably the best way of an N5. And I think the way that they put this in there is that maybe they would say, oh, we have a utility form for you to file. It's not an N5 anymore. It's like, well, I want them evicted because it's going to take me forever to keep having them on a payment plan for the utilities. And the utilities are obviously going to have to continue to keep flowing to that property. So it could be good, it could be bad, but I think all it was, it's another form and another filing fee that's going to go to the landlord and tenant board.
Yeah. Going through the board, you know, word is that it's probably not going to open until November is last I heard. Who knows? But I'm giving this one the old yellow flag. Yeah, I don't like it that much. So on to the next one. Rent increase deemed not void. So this has to do, you've probably heard about the illegal rent increases, and I sort of trying to wrap my head around it, I guess. You know, when you talk about illegal rent increases being legal eventually, it talks about the result of the landlord's failure to give at least 90 days written notice of a landlord's intention to increase the rent. Under subsections 1351, the increase in rent is deemed not to be void if the tenant has paid the increased rent in respect of each rental period for at least 12 consecutive months, provided the tenant has not, within 1 year after the date of the increase, is first charge, made an application about the validity of the rent increase is an issue. So they're just saying that, okay, you got a rent increase, maybe it wasn't done within, according to 90 days, maybe it was less than 90 days, maybe it's more than the prescribed amount, according to the government. And the government now is saying under Bill-184, well, if the tenant doesn't come back within 12 months, then it's legal. That's it. It's done. It stays the same because the tenant had had 12 months to figure it out, and so be it. And I think my understanding is that the 12 months used to be 24 months, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think for the way that the rent increases, so the tenant could always go back, from my understanding is that if you gave an illegal rent increase or you didn't give it on the proper form and you didn't use the N1, the tenant was going to be able to come back at the landlord and get back the rent increase, as long as if it was 5 years, 10 years, they can get that much money back because it was not given in the manner that it was supposed to. If it was on the wrong form, if it was above the guideline rent increase, you were having to give that back. Now with this one, it's more the concept that there was an agreement, or, you know, hey, you know, it's a $2 more or $3 more, like, is it now voided and you have to give all that money back? I think this would be a win for the landlords, so to speak. And this is why it was definitely pissed off a lot of tenant associations, because they always thought that the landlords are going to do something shady, and this is another way for them to keep increasing the rent. But in a way, you could have this as a tool to say, hey guys, you know, I just got my bills in for this year. The increase for our utilities and hydro and everything went up. I am going to raise my rent now, you know, $30 when it should have been 20. And if they don't fight it within that year, hey, at least you got that extra 10 to help compensate for the utilities. And other tenants would take that and say, oh, you increased it above the guideline. This is where I'm going to get my money back now from the time you've implemented it.
Yeah. Okay. And Alex asked if 135 is grandfathered. The original 135, I guess he's talking about.
No, it would have to be, so it might be just on the new leases. It might be just any increases that are happening from the time Bill 184 is going to be approved.
Yeah.
It won't, I don't see them grandfathering that in.
Okay.
They're just going to leave that the way it is, I think. It's going to get too hairy and dicey, and the board's already overloaded.
Yep. All right. So now we'll move on. I think
Lots of good questions there, though.
All right. Some other items to check out. They talked about penalties for illegal evictions. Hey, Kayla, like the fines have gone up for that. $25K today, I think, for, no, what is it?
It's gone from 25,000 to 50,000 for an individual.
Yeah.
And then 100,000 to 250,000 for a corporation.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's the big one. You can tell this is why Bill 184 was kind of introduced. This is the whole strengthening to stop the rent evictions from happening, so that it does discourage people from wanting to do illegal evictions.
Yeah.
But again, it's just going to come into the concept that, you know, people are going to balance that out. You know, if a tenant's in there for like a year or 2 years because you can't have your case heard in front of an adjudicator, and you're already at $25,000 loss now because they've been in for a year, sometimes it's worth the fine just to remove them. I think that's why they've now increased it now to 50,
Yep.
to make sure that you're going through the landlord and tenant board process and having it dealt with then. But if you look at how many unlawful evictions that are happening at the landlord and tenant board, there's not that many. But if you look at how many non-payment of rents that are happening at the landlord and tenant board, now they have an understanding of what the actual backlog is, and you'll start to hear from the elected officials happening about money being sent to the service managers. They just, in the beginning of COVID, they put 148 million. Now they just added another 150 million into the shelter systems and really trying to put funds there. It's because they know what's going to happen once the board does open and the changes do happen, where we can have our issues dealt with faster.
When we're watching, for people who didn't watch the show or the sessions on online in committee, the NDP wanted the fines for corporations at $1 million. That's where they wanted to start. So.
Oh yeah, they also wanted full rent control as your tenants move out. So if you voted if your tenants now left, they want to control how much you raise your rent on the new tenant. They also wanted the rent increase for they also wanted our rent increase, the one that just recently passed, where you have a year to dispute it. They wanted it to be 5 years. So whatever the government, and they're like, no, we're not doing that. No, I'm like, so, and I kept counting. I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. We win. You don't need hockey as long as they're dealing with policy and housing right now. I tell you that.
Yeah. And then also one thing that I didn't put in the slides, I ran out of time. There are fines for landlords if you do not provide the right of first refusal to tenants. So that means if you're doing renovations, conversions, demolitions, that type of thing, and the tenant says, yeah, I want to move back into the unit, and then you do not provide the unit to them, then there are heavy fines for that if the tenant decides to go to the board. I don't have the fine amounts with me, but that's,
Yeah, I can't remember on the top of my head.
yeah.
There's too many zeros lately.
Ready. Mediation we covered, and I think when we were watching the sessions, like last week and the week before, the thing that jumped out at me is we know that landlords, we're not covered well by the media. We're, in general, the general public, has a skewed way of looking at us. Bad landlords, all that type of thing. But what was really good to see during the committee hearings, and what was good to hear, was the fact that the members who were on the committees, even the NDP and the Liberals, they were actually separating the landlords into small landlords and the big corporations. They're starting to wrap their heads around that idea. We like to say housing providers, try to differentiate, not use the word landlord, try to get out of that because it has a negative connotation to it. But I was really happy to see that, yeah, okay, they're starting to listen. At least the people who are on this committee, they understand that the small landlords, like Teresa was up there, she presented it really well and it came across really good. And it was good to hear that they weren't lumping us in with the Mintos and the Timber Creeks and all those type of big corporations, because we are different.
Oh, and you heard them talk about the 50% of the housing stock being small landlords, and trying to encourage small landlords into the industry, and how certain policies that the NDP were trying to get implemented would discourage landlords from getting into the industry. So I think they get that concept, because it's the supply and demand issue that they see, and that's why they need to create more friendlier policies and a very much of a friendly, fast and efficient dispute resolution program that is needed for us to handle this. Because as much as we have our good landlords, we have bad landlords, and we have our bad tenants, but at the same time, the only thing that what I did miss though through Bill-184, because it's the break for that little that hour, is about the database of landlords who are issuing evictions for N12 or N13 notices, that they want that to be given to the landlord tenant board. So there is a database on it, how often that landlord's using it. That's the part that I missed myself. So we're looking into everything, but we gave them so much information, and you're still communicating with all of the people on the standing committee. And just know this is just a step. This is the first bill. There's obviously got to be more bills that we need to get going and to really address the housing crisis, because it touches it a little bit, but it's not going to deal with the backlog. That's what we have to really follow Doug Downey right now.
I forgot the other thing that was people, and that's I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Hold on one second. One thing that we should mention too was something, and I forgot to type it out on that last page, and that has to do with the affidavit. They wanted landlords to, and I don't remember if it's in Bill-184. I thought I read something about it. But whether or not landlords had to complete an affidavit whenever they asked a tenant to vacate, right, for personal use or for renovations. So say, yeah, okay, and they'd have to fill out that affidavit, send it to the landlord tenant board, and then the board could see if there's a trend, right, if it's something that a landlord is doing continuously. I don't remember if that was actually in Bill-184 or if it was just something mentioned by the NDP.
The affidavits was always a part of the N12s.
Okay.
Yeah, that you always had it. I think it's just about the collection of it. And I think it's about putting it into a database so that adjudicator can see if that in particular landlord is abusing it and doing it for all of their units. Because believe it or not, when you have so many units and you have a family member that is willing to move around, what's to stop that landlord from taking their mom and move their mom around to all these units for a year at a time, just to kind of, get the turnover. But and again, we wouldn't need that. I would. But you wouldn't need that if you were able to adjust your rental rate. That is fair, because the 2.2%, and I'm hearing rumors of 1.6% this year for 2021. It's not enough when you see the constant increase for all of the utilities, the hydro, gas, water, insurance, property taxes, now with COVID happening. And the other thing that the NDP also wanted to do as well is with, if your taxes are being lowered by a certain percentage, then you have to pass that savings. The NDP wanted us to give a 90-day notice to our tenants to inform them that we have to decrease their rent. I'm like, the city already does that for us. And the other part that people, if you haven't watched the videos, and you're not going to be able to watch, because I think it was just a live stream and you can see the transcript, but they did talk about the getting your notice to your tenant. If you apply to the board to raise your rent above the guidelines, it goes on an expiry. So there's an expiry of how long that rent increase goes until, and they wanted the landlords to remind the tenants to inform them that there is an expiry and the expiry date comes up at this time frame. And I was glad to see that Parm Bill was like, hey, it's on the paperwork. You don't have to keep making these landlords keep reminding the tenants. It's on the paperwork. They need to read it, and they need to be able to remind themselves that, hey, I'm not paying the rest of this increase.
For sure. Well, that was, I'm just getting feedback, guys, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating here. That was great, Kayla. We won't take up any more time. I know you have your family to go back to and 4 little ones. Or
I'll stay here.
But thanks a lot for your time. That was really good. I hope you guys liked it. I know it's a really dry subject. It's hard to talk about and to focus on and everything. It's not always glamorous sort of thing, but we hope that the information is useful and you can take it away and it'll help you in the future. We're expecting this to actually receive royal assent this week, is my understanding. I thought it was going to be today. Maybe it has, but I haven't seen anything in the news about it. Have you heard anything, Kayla?
Not yet. I've been following the status on it. So you just have that blurb. Nothing else is really happening with it. They got that emergency. We're following the suspension of the eviction process right now, because they talked about, it looked like at the end of the month, that this suspension on the eviction order could happen as soon as that they lift the state of emergency. It seems like our order to prevent evictions could stop. So that could be July 15th. Rumor has it was going to be around July 24th. They could extend it for. But if we can see that they're going to lift the state of emergency, that means our evictions could be in play. We may not be waiting until November. But again, I think they're timing it very closely into the changes that are happening with the Attorney General, because there's no way the board can open up the way that it's going. So I think they're really trying to put everything together now from the Attorney General side in order to open up the evictions once again. But the first thing that they will do is go ahead and push through the evictions that were already granted prior to COVID.
Great stuff. All right, guys, thanks again for coming. If you don't know, if you haven't heard, I'm starting a new real estate organization. I do have my meetup, but we're converting that into a formal organization in the Ottawa area, so stay tuned for that. And I'll be posting this on YouTube as well, and I'll be posting a replay on Facebook if you want to take a watch again. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. And Kayla, you're awesome. Thank you very much for your expertise again, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.